Hey, what's happening? What's poppin', everybody? Welcome to my journey to become the king of the GBA D League, where we're gonna stun on these fools. We're gonna put on a show. We're gonna show these guys who the BBC king really is. If you guys are new, checking me out for the very first time, welcome to my channel. You guys are gonna see the finest of heats. You guys are gonna be entertained, and this is gonna be a fun ride. And for those people who've been next to me since day one, you guys already know the deal. You guys already know. Look, you guys are probably looking at me right now and you're thinking, what in the actual fuck did you draft? The amount of people that have told me I have one of the worst drafts of the D League, and you guys are coming to my video and you're thinking, what is this guy really on? This draft analysis is going to go in depth. It's going to have different angles. It's going to be different from everybody else because you're going to see exactly why I drafted different pairings. I didn't draft for value's sake, and that's why my overall team looks not that good. I don't have any playmakers. I don't have the Magirnas, the Cocos, but that's fine. I don't need them. I drafted very safe. The amount of mons that I reached for, I understand getting certain mons super early, like the Talonflame pick. These are a little bit unconventional. Even Garchomp doesn't even go round one all the time. So I understand, but if you watch this draft analysis, you get to get inside of why I got the mons that I did, how they're gonna function, and how we're gonna slay these guys every single week. But I got a secret. There's something that has been on my mind for a very long time. I gotta get it out. And the real insight is Duncan Knee Deep was right the entire time. What I'm referencing is the GBA is rigged. And I'm not bullshitting you. What I'm referencing is in sports, the Tom Brady of the NFL. If you look at him wrong as a defensive player, you get fined and kicked out of the game. If you're a UFC fighter named Conor McGregor and you throw dollies at people, you get to fight several months later. And these players get special privileges because there's money to be made. And so when we look at the D League players returning, they're Leo, Randy, Greg. Guess who got the very first picks in the entire draft and were able to pick the most busted mons in the entire draft, in which Magirna is given to Leo. Of course, Leo gets the privilege of getting Magirna, which shouldn't even be in this league because he last season won it. You have Randy with the second overall pick who gets Celesteela, probably the second most busted mon in league format. Of course, he gets it because he also was in the finals. And then you got Gregulator, who many know as a fake troll, who's not as good as the BBC King, but regardless, he got Tapu Koko, in which is a god amongst men, as many of you guys know. And I, as the BBC King, have to overcome that. I'm washed up. I'm still stuck in Gen 6. But as you're going to see, I'm going to overcome it, and this is how we're going to do it. Mega Diancie is the centerpiece of my offense. It starts with Mega Diancie. Its speed tier separates itself from the majority of mons. And another beautiful thing about Mega Diancie is there is 0 immunities to its dual stabs. This is very, very important for counterplay, as if I click Moonblast, if I click Diamond Storm, in which are very accurate. Also, I have Power Gem over Diamond Storm if I really do not want to miss, as Mega Diancie and the rest of my offensive Pokemon do not have to ever consider missing, which is another key component about my offense. You realistically only can switch Shuka Steel types to reliably switch into Mega Diancie's dual stabs. If you look at the rest of my offensive Pokemon, every single one of them has super effective stab versus steel types. Garchomp, Talonflame, Blaziken, Heracross, Krookodile. So, if you are the Shuka steel types that naturally check Mega Diancie. You also deal with 50-50s on your end, not my end, because it is very tricky. If you bullet punch Mega Diancie and I go into Talonflame, you're risking Flame Body and you're risking trying to switch into Talonflame. Same thing with Garchomp. You are risking me being Rocky Helmet and Rough Skin, taking a ton of recoil, and trying to even switch into Z Garchomp, so you take the Rough Skin, and then you try to have to switch into Garchomp. Krookodile has the Intimidate, try to switch into Krookodile, you understand the concept. But if you have a Scizor and click U-turn or the momentum move, or you expect Mega Diancie to switch out, Mega Diancie has base 160 special attack and base 160 attack. It is extremely difficult to defensively check this thing, and if you predict wrong, if you make a read and it does not work out for you, you lose that Mon, and because of the base 110 speed, that might actually cost you the game. This is why I decided Mega Diancie was going to be the centerpiece of my offense. The next piece of my offense is something that I picked with my very first pick of the draft, which is Garchomp. This is going to be my Zmon user, and this is something that I value a lot, specifically because of its speed tier. This is what separates itself from Landorus and Zygarde. Now, obviously it doesn't have 1,000 arrows and it doesn't have Intimidate, but what this Garchomp does provide is every single Mon that can boost their offenses and speed, so Dragon Dance and Quiver Dance, for the most part, bar like weird exceptions like Rabombe, Garchomp can outspeed. So specifically the Volcaronas, the Salamances, the Charizard X, traditionally Scarf Garchomp can revenge those, and that is very important because there's a lot of mind games there. So I can be incredibly safe and bring Scarf Garchomp, or I would predict my opponents to not bring Dragon Dance, Charizard, or Volcarona or Quiver Dance. I mean, traditionally they will, but sometimes in prep they're going to say, okay, he's forced to bring Scarf Garchomp. I'm not going to bring the speed boosting moves and maybe run Sword Stance on Charizard or things like that, and it really plays mind games with that function. Another very important function with Garchomp is because of its Z move and its coverage, it is going to be extremely difficult to switch into, and if you do have some sort of switch in, I also have Sword Stance plus Z move, I should be able to then get an Oko unless you outplay the Z move. So the traditional switch ins to Garchomps, they're going to be Clefables, they're going to be the bulky fairies, the bulky waters with Ice Beam, or, I guess they can try to Scald Burn. The flying types that would outspeed Garchomp and can switch into Earthquakes, and then the bulky grass types with HB Ice or things of this nature. These are going to be the traditional switch-ins to Garchomp. Z Outrage hits 3 out of the 4, except for the bulky fairies, and I have Z Earthquake for the fairy types. So once again, they're really going to have to outplay my Z mons. Another thing is, when we look at the flying types, I have Zapdos. Zapdos, originally when I did pick the Garchomp, I knew that Zapdos specifically was going to be a very good pairing with Garchomp because the bulky waters that tried to defensively check Garchomp, Zapdos switches into. The bulky flying types, or flying types that outspeed, I have Zapdos that pretty much wall it. I have Zapdos that also can switch into Giga Drains and HB Ices and stuff from Tangros and things of this nature. Also, Big Boy Heracross and Talonflame and even Blaziken can obviously bust through fairy types and can bust through the bulky waters and the bulky grass types. So Garchomp is going to be very scary to try to defensively check it, and offensively, you're going to also have to outplay the Zapdos. Okay, the next part of my offense, you better put respect on his name. It is Talonflame. I get it. It's been nerfed. We don't need to talk about it. OP Jellicent, hold this bird's dick. Anyways, this thing is still a monster. Its primary role is obviously to revenge things. And it has momentum and U-turn, which is very beautiful on a choice-banded Talonflame set. So its offensive presence is still there. Oh, it's got a base 81 attack. Hold this thing's dick, bro. This thing has Brave Bird and Flare Blitz. And why that's so beautiful is because when we look at a lot of flying types, they're a little bit more reliant on Hurricane and stuff like that. Mons that are flying type that have Brave Bird should be greatly more appreciated than special attacking flying types. Greatly. Because flying types is one of those weird niche typings that are very difficult to switch into because rock and electric and steel are the only resistances, and electric and rock, they're kind of like niche typings that you don't really use or see, and they're kind of in the lower tier. So generally you see steel typing and you got flare blitz for them too, so it's like the only real check to Talonflame is going to be rock types, and not all rock types can switch into it. Like Magdancy gets dropped by Talonflame. Like Talonflame counters Magdancy from an offense standpoint with Steel Wing. So it also has a couple other tools in its toolbox, and another thing you gotta appreciate with Talonflame, other than its momentum, its choice band, and is you don't really know what it's gonna be, because once again it can sword stance. It can really beat its counters if you play it correctly and it's the correct set, because of sword stance, taunt, willow, things like that. And flame body also is kind of a good ability. Like, it's like obviously unreliable, you never know what's going to activate, but it does mean that you got to be very careful in contact moves. But once again, from an offensive standpoint, things like Tornadus and things like Thundurus that would outspeed my Garchomp, Magdancy, Talonflame just revenges them. Talonflame is going to be the fastest mon on my entire team, and if you put some respect on his name, is going to shine. One of the biggest criticisms you may hear about my team is that it lacks breaking potential. So as you see, I have the Deancey, Garchomp, Talonflame, even Blaziken. They have Sword Stance and Calm Mind, but a breaker does not have to set up in order to get its kills. Heracross is essentially a choice-banded mon without being choice-locked, which is so crucial because if I'm choice-locked in a close combat, then you can then switch out into your flying type or your ghost type, and I have to then predict you to either switch into them to then pivot into something else, or it creates a lot of mind games. Heracross avoids mind games. It is the only mon that has any inaccurate moves with its stab Megahorn, which is once again not even that necessary to spam, because its most spammable move is close combat. So once again, a very accurate mon. It also is a deterrent from my opponent considering T-Spikes versus me, because okay, I don't have a poison type, in which I don't really think that's that big of a deal. And a beautiful thing is I can activate my Guts earlier, or I can even be Moxie, and that can be scary, because if I'm Moxie, Choice Scarf, Heracross, and then I also have Facade, which it plays mind games, because if you get up T-Spikes and then you think I'm Flame Orb, but then I'm not Flame Orb, but I'm really Choice Scarf and I get Moxie boosts, it gets really scary really fast. So another very key component with Heracross is the common things that kind of threaten my offenses from, okay, what defensive mons can check Garchomp, Deancey, Ground types. Okay, Heracross can check, the majority of ground types. We're talking about grass types. Okay, Heracross can absorb a lot of grass type moves, and they can bust them up with a Mega Horn, close combat, whatever. Another beautiful thing is that, yes, it has a 4 times weakness, and Talonflame has a 4 times weakness, but they also are going to help each other, because if I face a superior or something like that, right? Superior offensively checks Diancie Garchomp because it gets the outspeeds. But then what hidden power are you going to run? Are you going to run HP Rock for Talonflame, or are you going to run HP Flying for Heracross? So that's going to be really scary. And Heracross really has no defensive counters because of its amount of coverage. And once again, it does have Sword Stance if I really do need to go that option. It's really scary because traditionally you would think that fairy types can check Heracross, but obviously it has the facade for that, has knockoff for the ghost types, it has earthquake for poison types, and there's nothing really that wants to switch into a Heracross, and it's a very beautiful mon. In order to run an effective offense, you don't always need priority, but if you have priority, you will greatly value it. In the sense of, if your opponent has a setup users, if your opponent has Scarfers, if you have Vacuum Wave, and you get prior damage onto those said mons, Vacuum Wave can then revenge, and that is huge from your playing and from your opponent's building, because if your opponent says, hey, he has a Vacuum Wave, Blaziken to always revenge this mon, what is the point of bringing this particular mon or this particular set? And it really opens up a lot of windows. Blaziken from a typing perspective is overlapped. So as you see, I have a fighting type in Heracross and I have a fire type in Talonflame. What Blaziken gives me is a fire type that can easily switch into Stealth Rocks without taking that much damage, unlike what Talonflame can do. And it can also give me a fighting type that is not weak to fairy types, in which the reason why that's important is because there are certain typings that are spammable versus opponents. So one opponent may have a huge fighting weakness, a huge whatever weakness, and Heracross may not have the best matchup because my opponent has something for it. Just having the option to run 2 fighting types is going to really open up each other's windows. Like, for example, dual fighting types are usually very good pairing, because if they got the bulky psychic types, Heracross, helps Blaziken out because it has Mega Horn, or, they got a Clefable, so Blaziken can get the 2 at KO without worrying about, dying to a Moonblast, where Heracross, it can obviously 2 at KO Clefable, probably with a Facade, but it may not want to obviously take the Moonblast, where Blaziken can do that. And it can also give me a special attacker as well, in which Diancie right now is my only real special attacker from an offensive standpoint, and Blaziken is still like a really good offensive special attacker, because obviously it has base 110 special attack. It has the only problems, obviously, especially, is going to be its hitting ability. So Fire Blast, Focus Blast, not the most accurate. It does have Vacuum Wave and Flamethrower, so it's not always reliant on those particular inaccurate moves. It really does have a lot of niche things about it, because it can run Dual Dance. It can have knockoff for the Lottie twins, in which something Emboar is in a higher tier and it's stronger, but it doesn't really break through, the Lottie twins and stuff like that, where Blaziken, it gets knockoff. Blaziken, it has high jump kick, so it's not reliant on close combat and superpower. And obviously high jump kick is something that's obviously a little bit scary, because if you miss, you die, and if you have your opponent have a Protectmon like Vaporeon to check the Blaziken, that can be scary too. But for the most part, Blaziken, it's it's a strong Pokemon. The last component in my offense is going to be Krookodile, and it's very simple what it does. It pursuit traps, and it is an elite pursuit trapper. Something that it lacks opposed to the rest of my offensive Pokemon is a really reliable setup options, but it does have very good coverage moves. So Knockoff and Earthquake are going to be very spammable stab moves to begin with, as they're very strong and stabbable. The other thing is if they have a Togekiss that obviously switches into that, you have Stone Edge, which can 2-hit KO lefties on, lefties Togekiss. If they have a Hydreigon, you can superpower that out of the park. And it has a lot of niche coverage moves. Another opening it does is for Garchomp. You don't know if I'm Rock's Garchomp or if I'm Rock's Krookodile. And that offensively opens up a lot of things, because you may not want to lose a turn of momentum by switching out as one of my 2 ground types goes for Stealth Rocks, but at the same time you don't know which is what role in the early game, and that really can open up a lot of options for me offensively. So it may force you to switch out as I go for Stealth Rocks and I gain a turn, or it may force you to stay in, not wanting to lose a turn, and then I'm actually Choice Banded, Life Orbs, Choice Scarf, and I'm an offensive role. So this is what's going to round out my offensive core. I really tried to make sure my offensive core all checked each other's weaknesses. I wanted to make sure that there was nothing that truly walled all of these. So the only real threat are bulky waters to my offensive core, not because they resist any of my moves bar Flare Blitz. They just are a little bit annoying to switch into because of Scald, but I'm really not going to be worried about that, as you're going to see my defensive core completely deals with any variant of water types, and we're going to move on. Alright boys, we're going to be hitting it off with our defensive core. So something that I value a lot is hazard control with the defensive Pokemon. Ferrothorn, very good hazard setter. Blissey, very good stealth rocker. Zapdos, reliable defogger. I want my offensive Pokemon to attack what's in front of it. Ferrothorn and Blissey can take hits from Daze, and they can easily get up Stealth Rocks versus the majority of Pokemon in general. And Zapdos can obviously outspeed a lot of things, defog, and it has a lot of resistances. And it doesn't really waste any turns, because Ferrothorn and Blissey, they don't really have much damage output. So if they do get up hazards, you're not really losing a turn. Slowbro, I would say, would be the key to my defense, even though any single one of the 4 can be a defensive juggernaut depending on the matchup. If my opponent has a lot of specially attacking Mons, Blissey is going to have a hell of a game. Whereas if they have a lot of physical attackers, Slowbro is going to have a very good role that game. So Ferrothorn can deal with that role from physical, defensive, whatever it wants to do there, and Zapdos has very good mixed defenses as well. So, once again, all depends on the matchup. I would say Slowbro is a little bit different from the 4 Mons because of what it pairs with. So, for example, Slowbro and Ferrothorn is a very, very nasty core from a typing perspective. Ferrothorn, 2 weaknesses: Close Combat, Flare Blitz. Slowbro resists both of those, and Slowbro, it doesn't want to switch into Leaf Storms, it doesn't want to take the Volt switches, and Ferrothorn can obviously take those for days. Another pairing is Slowbro Blissey. Blissey, it can pretty much take all the hits except for very strong physical attacks and close combat. Slowbro deals with that. Slowbro deals with a lot of physical attackers, especially if it gets Scald Burns. It doesn't want to deal with very strong special attackers, and that's what Blissey can do. And Zapdos, as we all know from a typing perspective, can just deal with so many things. And Zapdos has many different niches it can do from a defensive standpoint. So we're going to be starting off first with Slowbro. I value Slowbro a lot because it has 2 very important typings. Water, from a defensive standpoint, is a staple. Psychic, the bulky Psychics, are a staple. Bulky Psychics are a staple because they switch into everything, and specifically the fighting spam. If I have the Cobble Berry, it can deal with the majority of fighting types. Bulky water types, they're only really weak to 2 different typings in electric and grass types, which I have answers to. And from a status perspective, it can scald burn things, Slowbro can toxic things, and it can T-wave things. It also can pressure a lot of defensive bulkier teams if I do decide to run the Calm Mindset. And the last thing that Slowbro gives me is the Regenerator ability. And the reason why regen is so important from a defensive standpoint is I can scout what move my opponent locks himself into. If they lock themselves into a super effective hit versus Slowbro and I can take that hit, I can then next turn pivot out. And if they're a choice lock, they're really having to deal with, okay, what am I going to switch out into? And it really creates a lot of mind games. Steel typing is the most important typing in the entire game. You have to draft a steel type, and you have to feel comfortable bringing it every single week. My Ferrothorn ended up being in tier 2, but if I were to get another steel type, it would be from tier 1. The majority of steel typings don't have any recovery, in which Ferrothorn has a decent option in recovery with Leech Seed. It does have a 4 times weakness, but a lot of steel types do have 4 times weaknesses. If Ferrothorn does have the Aqua Berry, it's essentially impossible to actually one-shot this thing, as this thing pretty much switches into Ice Beams, Knockoff. It can switch into everything with ease, and it most importantly has spikes. Spikes can win games on their own, and it forces your opponent to bring more offensive teams, because if I bring Ferrothorn and if I bring Spikes and you bring a fat team, your team is going to be worn down easily with hazards. Hazards are very important versus fatter teams, bulkier teams that get chipped down, and if I set up a sword stance, I might need Stealth Rocks plus spike damage in order for me to be able to get the one shot on something. Spikes are huge. Leech Seed on Ferrothorn is very strong because unless they have HP Fire on their grass types, Ferrothorn can with ease Leech Seeds on so many different things, because fire types generally are going to be the natural switch in to Ferrothorn, or fighting types. And between Gyro Balls that are also very strong, Ferrothorn is not really a passive Pokemon all the time because of its high base power moves in Gyro Ball, which is often very strong, and Power Whip, which will be able to 2-hit KO pretty much all the water types other than Suicune, which is busted as fuck. And Ferrothorn can't really deal with all the fairies, but it can deal with a lot of fairies, and it doesn't deal with all the dragons because they often carry Fire Blast or Fire Fang, but it can also deal with a lot of Dragon Dancing. Obviously not Charizard X, but it can deal with the majority of Dragon Dancing dragon types. Blissey is something that I've never seen fully utilized in League format. I've never really seen this Mon even drafted and used successfully. This is a tier 4 pick, so it didn't really cost me anything, and it is something that I felt would be very important for my team, especially from a defensive standpoint, because it can deal with the majority of special attackers. So the critiques obviously are, it is setup fodder to substitute mons, to setup mons, to things that are breakers that always switch into Blissey. I understand that. I will realize this in team building, so if I feel like my opponent will make certain plays or bring certain sets, I can then adjust to that. But something that is very powerful about Blissey is that even if I were to never use Blissey, it will put in the finest of work, because you have to respect it. If you cannot kill Blissey, it will win by itself. Thus, you have to really prep for Blissey appropriately with these setup mons. And if I know you're going to have the setup mons or the substitute mons or whatever deals with Blissey, I will see that coming and adjust to that. So Blissey also gives me a lot of different tools with obviously Stealth Rocks. It gives me a Wish Passer. It gives me Healing Wish, which is something that I might use. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much if I'm even going to use Blissey. It's something that I might use a lot or I might not use at all. It's really weird. It's a weird mon. It's essentially free. People think it's a complete garbage pick, but obviously I think it is something that gives me a lot of value because you have to prep for it. And if my opponents don't prep for it, I'm going to bring it at least once, and you're going to look like a dumbass if you lose to Calm on Blissey, is all I'm saying. Zapdos is going to round out my defensive core, and this is really the only mon that is most annoyed by Toxic. Slowbro is not annoyed too much by Toxic because of the regen ability, and Slowbro doesn't stay in all day, every day. Ferrothorn obviously immune to Toxic, and Blissey has Natural Cure. So that's one thing going strong with Zapdos is that between Guts Heracross, Magic Bounce, Mega Diancie, Ferrothorn, Blissey with Natural Cure, Zapdos can get really scary in order to try to kill it. Obviously, my opponents will still carry Toxic Mons, but I have much counterplay to that. Zapdos, from a defensive standpoint, can be physically defensive, especially defensive. It's not passive, as it's very strong. It gives me momentum with Volt Switch or U-Turn. It gives me Defog, and overall, we know that Zapdos is a very strong Pokemon, as it's a Tier 1 Mon. It's kind of overlooked and kind of should be expected to be overlooked too, just because there are the Thundurus, there's the Cocos, and then in the lower tiers you see Raikou and even Jolteon. There are so many good electric types, but Zapdos, from a defensive standpoint, is really annoying to deal with because it has a lot of key resistances. It doesn't really have many weaknesses, and it's an elite defogger that creates momentum, and it has a very high speed stat. So if it were to face a breaker, I can deal with it a little bit more offensively because I might be able to hit it with super effective damage. I can outspeed it, and that's also what makes Zapdos such a really good defensive Pokemon, is because it can also be more threatening offensively, and it means that breakers aren't able to break Zapdos as well. This last and final mon, to this last and final chapter, to this glorious run we're about to turn up in the D-League, go Mount Rushmore. When people try to hit me up with this oh gosh bullshit, get that out of my face. Hit them up with the oh Gogoat with their ass, man. Fuck Regulator, fuck these GBA D-League players. Mount Rushmore's coming in to the D-League. Get hype. I am so excited for the spiciest hot Gogoat memes coming in hot. Don't prep for Gogoat. Don't prep for any of my mons. I'm washed up. My draft is bad. Keep sleeping on me, GBA. If you're a real fan, sticking this long, I greatly appreciate it. And this is going to be a fun road. So stick with me until the end. And until next time, I'm signing out. Peace.